Happy Monday. Welcome to our monthly webinar, Everything Parkinson's. We have a great topic and very apt, I think, for the first quarter of the year. Our speaker today is probably known to some of you already. She is our licensed clinical social worker. She has worked in the field since 1988. She is part of a multidisciplinary team that provides psychological services and patient centered care here at the Pacific Brain Health Center and the Pacific Neuroscience Institute. She helps provide patients and their family with increase their ability to cope and regain a sense of control by offering counseling and assessments and referrals and community-based programs. She is also our APDA liaison. Please welcome our speaker for today, Sheila Moore.
Thank you, Giselle. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Petrosian and Dr. Diaz. I'm so glad that you're here and on the panel today. I am so grateful to have the opportunity to speak to you about ways to really enhance and build coping and resilience. So far in the series, we've had some outstanding presentations on symptoms and medication management and lifestyle development. And so today I'm just going to take it and drill it down just a little bit further in terms of looking at emotional wellness. So I just want to welcome you all here. My only regret is that I can't see you. So much of the work that I do has to do with, being able to see and talk to people one-on-one and in groups. So I feel a little disadvantaged, but we'll do the best that we can. And we'll have my information at the end of the presentation. So I would be most happy and would welcome comments or anything that I can help you with. Giselle, thank you so much for the generous introduction. It is a pleasure to be serving you on such a wonderful team here at Pacific Movement Disorder Center. And like Giselle was saying, I have a great opportunity to work with many of you, I'm sure, that are on this webinar. So I'm just really glad to be here. So today, I was thinking about what the goals are, at least what my goals are for today. I think to start out, they'd be to validate the challenges you may be experiencing emotionally. That I hope that we provide you with the opportunity and to remind you of the strengths that you've been cultivating all your life, that bring you here, that has brought you to this point, and that will sustain you. To explore resources that you can access, to review some tools for coping, and then to identify ways that you can start building resilience or continue to build resistance today. And there we'll have time for some tips that will be coming on in the presentation. So, and I think when I think about it in the softest sense, that I think it's important that we all remind you that you're not alone. You, your care partner, or your family, you belong. We are here to support you, and we are your team. And also that I think even more important that the team of Dr. Diaz and Dr. Petrosian and Giselle and myself and the Pacific Movement Disorder Center is that you are not alone in terms of a greater community of those who have been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a fierce and strong community. A community that moves the needle further in terms of research and really inspires those who have the charge of making things better and finding a cure. Want to remind you that you have internal resources that will sustain you. We're going to talk about resilience, and there are community resources that will support you, and those are some of the tools. So want to get started right away and remind you that you are your greatest resource. That's my great opportunity. All of us when we work with you and work together with you in partnership. And this journey with Parkinson's disease, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And just like a marathon runner who trains diligently, I think some of the critical pieces are that you pace yourself, that you train, that all of us train mind, body, and spirit. And that just like a marathon runner on the course, always kind of keeping their eye on where's that water in that fueling station, where are those resources? And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. So when I was thinking about emotional well-being and emotional wellness, I think it really is about being your healthiest self. It's about creating and leaning into your interpersonal strengths. And it's about really, I feel, opening and learning more about you. It's really an opportunity to learn more about you as someone who's been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, what's different, but also what's the same. What are those strengths that you have? Some definitions of emotional well-being or wellness. Emotional wellness is the ability to successfully handle life's stresses and adapt to change in difficult times. So being able to manage stress and adapt, being flexible and nimble as these things come up on a day-to-day basis. Emotional wellness is being with all your feelings in a way that has to do with curiosity and kindness and non-judgmental, cultivating non-judgment in terms of moving forward day to day. And when I was thinking about emotional wellness, it really plays a key role in our overall well-being. Whether we're talking about chronic disease or we're talking about aging or we're talking about just day to day in the age of COVID, right? Emotional well-being influences our body's response. Our body's response influences our emotional well-being. It impacts our outlook on life. And it also influences how we cope with challenges and changes. And I'm really visual, so I have lots of pictures that I've added to slides, because as you can see that the mind with the social awareness, the intellectual awareness, the emotional wellness, the body, the physical wellness, you can see how they intersect. And that's an important piece to remember and think about. And I'll be talking about that more as we go on with the presentation. So what are the signs of emotional wellness? And I've highlighted a couple, and I'm sorry, this is kind of a little teeny bit of a crazy slide. But I wanted to add this just so that you can see, not necessarily as though, yes, kind of where you might be hitting these marks, but just in kind of a general kind of broad overview of what is emotional wellness. The signs of emotional wellness are you have ways to manage stress, you have a sense of purpose, you take care of your physical health, you're open-minded, you're not afraid to ask for support and often ask for support. Your strongest relationship is with yourself, and I find that very powerful. Personal growth is key to your success, which is, I think, really important. You live your life. You are committed to regular self-care. You are not closed off from your emotions. You're willing to have them and experience them and hold them. And you are adaptable and resilient. And the picture is of the brain in terms of more from an emotional wellness perspective, thinking about being here, being now, taking the time, attending, breathing, being in the present moment, where I think we find our greatest strength in emotional wellness. So some of the challenges to emotional wellness as I see them for one, the pandemic, the uncertainty, the isolation that's come from this experience, this extraordinary experience that we find ourselves living through. The changes in self-esteem and self-worth that may be related to the Parkinson's diagnosis, as things change, coming to accept, what does this mean for me now? Perhaps fears about the future. Some people do future tripping. Oh, what will happen? What if? Start looking to the future far ahead and when staying put can be much more helpful. Oftentimes, depression and anxiety interfere with emotional well-being. Loss and losing faith in oneself impacts emotional well-being. So the challenges, these daily challenges, can create roadblocks for our emotional well-being. When we're discouraged, that can be a roadblock. When we're stressed, that can be a roadblock. When our symptoms can seemingly take over our day and kind of derail us and railroad us, that can really create a roadblock for emotional well-being. And oftentimes when we're stressed, when we have these roadblocks, the things that make us feel good are often the first thing to go. Self-care, rest, positive self-talk. Those are usually the first things, the things that help us are the first things that we let go of. So how do we stay focused on ourselves to be our best selves during times of challenge? How do we redefine the day, stop in the middle, and restart? How do we not get lost in the challenge of the day-to-day? Well, I'm going to say, and I'm going to invite you today to look to how to foster emotional wellness and foster resilience. The insert says sometimes just putting one foot in front of the other is the superhuman achievement that we have to get through day-to-day challenges. So the rest of the presentation I'm going to be spending talking about resilience. And how do we define resilience? And this would be a time if I could see you, I'd want to find out, how do you define for yourself resilience? But I do have some ideas. Resilience is the ability to recover from our experiences and setbacks, to adapt and move forward, and sometimes even experience growth. Resilience refers to patterns of positive adaptation that follow a significant adversity, such as trauma, death, loss of a relationship, job loss, financial stress, and or serious health problems. And I love that. I'm so visual, but I love this. This is growth in a burnt out trunk, of a tree that you might not expect, but there's the opportunity for growth in the unexpected. Building resiliency, we all have the capacity to be resilient. It's something that we can develop through our thoughts and behaviors, that it really is a practice. It's about making some daily changes, and not necessarily huge changes. When I think of making changes, particularly in terms of developing resilience and emotional well-being, I'm thinking of the very small changes that can build momentum, that can become larger changes. And I think one's openness to change is really, really impactful and important. And there are behaviors that significantly impact resilience for people living with Parkinson's disease. And we're going to talk about those right now. When we think about resilience and coping with Parkinson's and living with Parkinson's disease, as the person with Parkinson's, perhaps their care partners, perhaps there are other family members on this webinar, the important connections that we have are those connections, just building connections, taking control of what you can, making adjustments in expectations, fostering acceptance and working on that as a process, and practicing self-compassion. So I'm going to talk a little bit about connections, and then in the green boxes are going to be ideas or kind of action steps. So I'm going to talk about connections and the importance, and then in each of the slides, there'll be this green box that will be kind of the ideas, and we'll talk about those too. I'll review those. So connections become very important when we talk about resilience and emotional well-being. It's the positive relationships and that supportive environment that play a significant role in facing adversity. I think we all know that when we are having a hard time, reaching out to someone becomes critical. that these solid relationships that we have really impact our daily lives. And these can actually be resilience influencers, these people in our lives, whether it's care partners, neighbors, friends, community members. If we have religious organizations that where these connections become paramount, become so important. These relationships contribute to our health and our outlook on life. And these positive relationships strengthen our resilience. It not only fosters it, strengthens it, sometimes it inspires us. We feel less stressed and we're more capable of overcoming our challenges when we have these connections. So in the idea box, there's some questions for you. Ooh, I don't know, you're probably seeing me move this around, I'm sorry. What are the meaningful connections in your life? If you want to take just a second and think about that, what are those meaningful connections that you have? Is it a son or daughter? Is it a best friend? Is it someone who lives close by or someone that you're connecting with over the phone? Maybe a group of people that you're connecting over the Zoom platform these days. And what are you doing now to connect? You know, it could be through like I was talking about some of those ideas, but how are you connecting? You know, do you have enough connection? It's just something to think about as we move through the presentation. You know, how are you identifying and how are you fostering those connections? We're living in a time when it can be very easy to just completely pull back. And like we talked about, that sometimes when we feel most challenged, it's our instinct might be to pull even further back. But what we're finding is that these connections and leaning in and moving forward become very important. And there are challenges to the connections related to Parkinson's disease. You know, are you hesitant? Are you not necessarily talking yet about your diagnosis? Are there people that you would like to know and you're like to know about what you're going through, and you just need some help and some support in getting there? You know, thinking through the next steps. You know, what are some of the challenges to these connections? So I invite you to think about that in terms of the toolkit that you're building. You know, how are you connected? How are you maintaining those connections? What might be the challenges, both internal and external? And think about that for a little bit. What might be those challenges? The next step is taking control of what you can control, right? One of the central elements of resilience, as it says here, is how we frame our information or our perceptions. And that becomes so important. The frame that we use in terms of how we think about our health and some of our health challenges. That a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease for many can turn our world upside down, and it can change the frame. But it's important to take a moment to really think about that frame. Are you looking at it from your healthiest, or are you looking at it from a place of loss and challenge? Those always words, never words, those that are critical in terms of our perceptions and our framework. You know, when you can find a way to interpret the diagnosis as meaningful, that frame or perception can really become an inspiration to take and to make changes that can improve your life in ways that you never might have predicted. You know, Giselle and I are co-facilitate the PRESS program, and we have heard some amazingly resilient people talk openly about some of the challenges. And so I've heard some people absolutely fearful of the diagnosis and what that means, thinking about how am I going to accept that, and taking their time, you know, with this new identification, these new challenges. And other people have said, you know what, I have never been healthier in my entire life. That this has really given me the opportunity to exercise, to get to know myself better, to be more open with my family. So the perception changes, and it makes it an important step in terms of resilience and how we cope. Someone else mentioned that their choice in terms of addressing their diagnosis and the changes that they experience, or their experience on a daily basis, was to live as loud and big. And I know that's part of some of the resources, but to live as loud as big as they possibly could, as long as they could. That was their charge for themselves. It was tremendously inspirational, and it really shows how that a frame, how we talk to ourselves, the words we choose, the building on the internal strength. Like I talked about, your greatest strength is you. What you bring here to this day is so important. And if the frame is a little off, if it's not quite, as positive, there's room. And I'm hoping that will be the message today, that there's room to reset, there's room to reframe. And there's lots of support and help for you along the way. So in the green idea box is the ideas that resilience is a set of cognitive skills that can be learned over time. So if the frame's a little off, there's room to change that. And just because we may not feel or be as resilient as we'd like to be, we can certainly become resilient. So towards the end, we're going to talk about this journey. That it's not necessarily a destination, that it's really in the process. So if one ever feels that, oh, this is a crummy day, this is it, this is the end, and I have more visuals because I want to talk about that because of the balance, be reassured that, it's just a day. And there's the opportunity to have these tools, to use these tools, and to make some good changes for yourself. And the first steps might be taking control of how we perceive these events and how we talk about them. So just like I was saying, the words that we choose, how we describe our day, how we describe our symptoms, how we describe ourselves, become very powerful when we talk about control, when we talk about resilience, when we talk about that emotional well-being. Taking control of what you can control becomes a powerful tool. Another point of building resilience is adjusting expectations. An important lesson to be learned from the most resilient around us is to let go, just a little at a time. And it's not about letting go of those big dreams that we have. In fact, it's all possible, or letting go of life as you always planned, but letting go of some of the challenges, some of the day-to-day tension points that you might experience. We want to encourage for you to set yourself up for success by being okay with whatever you can do in any given moment. That that there naturally will be some changes, but it doesn't have to change the picture completely. So some of the recommendations or some of the ideas, and these may be simple, but it's important to realize that when we're involving ourselves in change, that the change has to start small. You might want to, for example, when we're talking about expectations, commit to setting a goal. And that might be, for example, attending an online exercise class a couple times a week. And even though and to feel strong and proud, even if your body doesn't fully cooperate each time you participate, but that you make note that you've made that commitment, that you go and you do the best that you can. And you realize that, the strength that you have in being there, that you're really building that resilient muscle, the inner strength, making that commitment to yourself and keeping it. You might want to make a list of the things that PD prevents you from doing, and create workarounds. And we certainly, Giselle and I have seen this in the press programs over and over again. For example, you might be someone who consistently went cycling outdoors or took lots of walks outside, but now you're finding that that's a little bit of a challenge. You might want to have a workaround about a stationary bike, or finding another way, like things like doing yoga. You want to retake control of your situation in a new and incremental way so you feel more optimistic and less powerless. So if things you aren't able to do exactly what you used to do, that the workaround is doing what you can. That's the power. That's the control. You know, Parkinson's is unpredictable, and its unpredictability may demand that you change your goals from day to day. That when we think about consistent, and this is true of all of us, I think it's just part of humanity, that if we were to really look at it, if we take a mindful approach, if we really were to take a look at our day, even from morning to afternoon, even from 1 hour to another, we would see that things change, that nothing is the same. And that the unpredictability is just like that there will be changes, and that the power is in being able to be flexible and moving with that unpredictability, and that the goals just change. The goals change. The good thing is that when you're able to go with the flow of the day and with peace and ease, you'll build your resiliency muscle along the way. So all of this is process. All of this gives you the opportunity to make these changes, to flex that flexibility muscle, that resilience that will ultimately end up in improved emotional wellness and well-being. And, I found this very helpful, and probably most helpful of all the tips, is plan for when you are at your best, and as the slide says, this may be the simplest and most accessible of all the actions you can take to build resilience. That, you've no doubt learned that you have good times and bad times, good days and bad days. We talked about the unpredictability of the days. And you have thoughts that make you feel alive, empowered, and unstoppable, and ones that drain you of all your energy. And it's important. This is part of getting to know yourself, getting to know your approach, getting to understand your frame. And the key is to accept all of those times as part of the broad experience, not to define yourself by a morning where you're not able to move like you thought you could or had hoped you'd be able to, or an afternoon when you were feeling particularly fatigued, or setting something up and feeling really the challenge of being motivated. That not to define yourself by those times, but really look in terms of the broad, the overall, of how the week was, for example, how the last 2 weeks, perhaps how the month was. It's only fair to not focus on that one time. I have a great slide, because I'm a visual, but I have a great slide coming up that really illustrates that. So I'm excited for that. It's a little corny, but it's really good. But anyway, so the idea is that, you don't define yourself. Don't take that frame over that one hardship. Look, I think you'll be surprised to see that there is much more opportunity of a variety of experience. That it's not just the bad, not just challenging, but that you've had good times as well. Times when movement has been easier, times when motivation has been easier, times when you have felt energized, not so fatigued. In the idea box, it talks about become a master at taking advantage of opportunities when you're at your best. And I love that. Become a master of taking advantage of opportunities when you're at your best. Focus on, take that frame, use that as how you're looking through things as your lens. Make a priority list for the day. And I know so many people I work with create those to-do lists. It's part of who we are. Many of us, some people aren't, but many of us do create the to-do list. And people are often discouraged because they're not able to get through that list. It can be a real challenge and a real point that's self-defeating. So make a priority list for the day and accomplish what you can at the beginning. Elizabeth Bradley, who's a physician at the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, recommends starting the day with a checklist and ranked by priority, so you know what to do first when your stamina is highest and what can go by the wayside if necessary. So not give it equal weight, so that if there's something that's really very important, and you know that the morning is the best, or maybe the afternoon is the best for you. This is really an opportunity, and it was a line in one of the slides. But I have to say that self-knowledge, knowing yourself, mind, body, spirit, becomes really critical in terms of how we frame and how we develop emotional wellness. So I love this, that you would develop a checklist, that you would know yourself. Oh, I'm better in the afternoon. I had someone I was working with who suffers from anxiety, for example. And we were talking about, getting through her day. She was saying the morning she was terribly anxious, but by the afternoon she started feeling much, much better. Just as she said, it was amazing. And so when we took her day kind of like not moment by moment, but when we looked at her routine of the day, we found out that she wasn't eating in the morning, that she'd often skip lunch. And so not eating, could really has an effect on anxiety. And so we talked about ways that she could start changing her routine so that she, and just an experiment. A lot of these things will be an experiment. And I want to encourage you to think of it as just that. Life is hardly made of absolutes, but yet we hold ourselves accountable so absolutely sometimes. And so I want to invite you to take a look at your daily routine and find out ways that you think you might want to change. And I'm hoping these slides and these ideas will inspire you, but that you look at it just as an experiment. Just like I asked my client, I kind of invited her to start eating in the morning. We brainstormed things that she could start eating, like avocado toast, for example, or something like that. I hope that's on the Mind diet. And when I checked in with her the next week, she was feeling so much better because she made a simple adjustment, like in terms of eating, for example, that made such a big difference. But so anyway, the idea is planning for when you're at your best so that you can be nimble and flexible and really support yourself, encourage yourself, be kind to yourself. Another idea is for planning when you're at your best is another idea of 3 good things. It's a 3 good things mantra. When we experience adversity, our brains are hardwired to dwell on what went wrong. And so we overgeneralize it. I think I've talked a little bit about that. Like life is hardly absolute, but we kind of judge ourselves absolutely. That if we take one area that we may not have exactly hit the mark for the day in terms of our expectations, we have a tendency to look at that, magnify that, and then, just like it says, bleeds into other aspects of our lives and creates a really challenging frame for us. One easy way to do this, to change this, is it's either at waking or in the evening or both. Come up with 3 good things that happen to you during the day. And it helps to show that it hasn't been all that bad. Again, we have a tendency to sweepingly say this was a really crummy day. When if you look at it and take the time, what or 3, sometimes I think about it in terms of finding sprinkling of joy in our day. Like if we were to think back on our day, that there might have been times that brought a smile. And it doesn't have to be big things. It can be very small things. Things to just make note of that were positive in the day. And it can be 3 things, in the beginning of the day or the end of the day. If you wanted to add on to that as extra, some people do gratitude lists. And gratitude becomes a very, very, very powerful tool in terms of creating that frame and in terms of creating that resilience and in terms of helping us move through the day. Being okay in both spaces is the victory. Feeling, acknowledging what may have not been exactly as we planned, or may have been some of the disappointments of the day, but also focusing on what did go well. What were the joys? What brought that smile? Was it a memory? Was it an email from a friend? Was it a YouTube video? Was it a neighbor walking their dog by and greeting you? Those kinds of those simple pleasures that can make a big difference in building resilience. In getting through our days and really embracing joy. So here's the corny, but I think the really very interesting and powerful slide. So you see the heart says, brain, look. And there's like all these good and the butterfly, like, oh, look at all the good. And the brain is like, not now. Can't you see I'm busy focusing on the bad? I mean, I just love that because I think that's humanity. But it's just a really very clear illustration of, I think, the importance for balance. And, I often talk to people in my practice about moving from head to heart, that it's quite a journey. But a well worth and worthy one. In our heads, we might bring that absolute judgment, that harshness, particularly when our bodies are changing, and it's not our choice, and we're trying to do the best we can to get through our day. To exercise, to keep up with things, to stay connected. And we might focus on that. Our mind might focus on that one bad spot, when the beauty, the power is to find the balance, is to bring the heart practice in, right? Brain, look, Sheila, look at all the good. I'm busy focusing on the bad. My anxiety about this presentation. But wait a minute, this is so great. I work with such a good team. I'm so pleased at the work that I'm doing. Most of you, I'm imagining some of you I work with, and it's my great delight. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's the balance is the victory, like the slide mentioned. Another key point to building resilience and emotional well-being is acceptance. And, this absolutely is a process. I wouldn't force anybody or push anybody through it, but just to let you know that acceptance, and I've heard this over and over again from people that I've had the pleasure of working with, that becomes a key and a pivotal shift in terms of their outlook and how they move through life, their daily life. Accepting a diagnosis of Parkinson's and all the changes that it may bring physically, emotionally, and mentally is easier said than done. Absolutely, for sure. However, not doing so as an alternative that leads many people towards depression and apathy, it's really hard. And I know that it's really hard to accept, but even beginning the process of opening your minds up, opening your hearts up, getting information, being with others who are experiencing similar symptoms in the community becomes very powerful. Depression and apathy directly impacts the actions that impact our quality of life. So many people that we work with talk about the not feeling motivated, feeling fatigued, feeling really depressed and anxious. And it affects everything, right? It affects how long or how well you exercise, even whether you entertain exercising or not, whether you want to connect with others. Part of being depressed, we talked about it at the beginning, is that isolation. That's the first thing when we're feeling depressed or not great about ourselves, is that we step back, which is absolutely contraindicated. We should be moving forward. It doesn't feel like it. You have to do contrary action, but it's really important. And prioritizing self-care. Sometimes that depression and apathy, that anxiety can really interfere. But it's a process worth exploring, thinking about, and we're all here to help you in that process. Care partners, colleagues, friends. So I love this. What is acceptance? So the slide shows it's raining. So when not in acceptance, someone says it's raining. I don't like rain. I wish it wasn't raining. My day would be better. If it wasn't raining, my day is ruined. Every day is like this. It's always like this. Why does it always rain? When all I want is for it to be sunny, And the acceptance ones, it's raining. Yep, it's raining. And that level of acceptance is that being present in the moment. This is how it is. This is what's coming up. This is what I have on my plate. I'm going to do the best I can with what this is and what I've got. And it is a process. Absolutely. It's a process. And like I said, I don't want anybody to speed along in their process, but hopefully you're on this path. And then I think a really important piece of this is in terms of emotional well-being and resilience is practicing self-compassion. So many of us, and again, it's humanity, can get stuck on, like I said, judging absolutely and harshly. And it really, I feel like one of your best tools is to bring like your heart and your self-compassion to your day. Self-compassion entails being warm and understanding towards yourself when you fail, when you fall short, when you suffer or feel inadequate, rather than judging yourself harshly. And Kristin Neff is an expert in loving kindness and radical acceptance. Honoring and accepting our humanness, I'll say, especially in the face of life challenges. That self-compassion activates that caregiving system in our brain and prompts us to act and protect and to care for ourselves, which is often exactly when one is not making the mark, the last thing one should be doing is, I often say, bringing the hammer. It's time to bring the heart and the softness and then understanding and compassion. Self-compassion and good self-care, which I consider to be patience, acceptance, giving ourselves a break, help us to build better relationships. We experience less stress. We have less loneliness. We're more creative. We sleep better. It kind of just impacts everything, particularly our resilience. And I love this. I found it's called the sweet spot. I remember playing tennis. So, that sweet spot that you feel when you play tennis, it just feels just great. You've hit it. So the sweet spot is those acts of self-compassion, right, in our daily life. And they can take today that is neither so what can you do to offer yourself self-compassion today that's neither self-denying or self-indulging? Because those are kind of two extremes. What I'm inviting you to do is find the middle ground, not be harsh, not be overindulgent, but to find a middle spot, that sweet spot where you practice self-compassion. It's very powerful. It's a very powerful practice. I'm trying to keep on the time. So I hope this is going to work. So when we talk about self-compassion, in the mindfulness movement, there is a particular practice called metta, or loving kindness. And it's about just taking a moment, settling yourself in, grounding, and offering yourself a blessing, offering yourself compassion. And so I went on YouTube, and YouTube is a great tool in terms of meditation, in terms of information. Dr. Petrosian's on YouTube. There's lots of great things that, APDA, Davis Finney Foundation, like it's I guess one always has to be careful, but it's a great resource. And I love to poke around with meditation and different practices. And Sylvia Boorstein is someone who brought meditation to the West many, many, many years ago. And I guess one would consider her an elder in these programs. And this is a 2-minute, easy, loving kindness. I chose this because I wanted to show how easy it can be and how powerful. Now, I hope this works. So if I can just have you all just to get yourself settled just for a moment. This is only going to be about 2 minutes. I hope you can hear her. And it's a very simple loving kindness exercise. You hear?
So you don't have to sit in a special way, but if you want to, close your eyes, and just take 2 deep breaths in and out, in and out, in and out. Big long breath in and out, and in again and out. And feel yourself sitting here. Feel yourself sitting here. Feel yourself surrounded by all these people. feel yourself, I hope, happy and content. And say, think in your mind, a blessing for yourself. The metta practice, loving kindness practice, always begins with a blessing for yourself. So think for yourself, may I feel safe. Think those words in your mind. May I feel content. May I feel strong. May I live with ease.
So it's that simple. Just taking a few minutes and offering yourself best wishes, blessings for contentment, living life with ease, offering, may I live it with patience of self. I mean, there are a multitude of different opportunities. And like I said, it doesn't have to be long. And I find that this is a powerful, powerful practice, particularly when there are frustrations, right? When you are just spinning out, something has happened, day is not going the way you would like it to be, symptoms are just, you've hit that wall and you just need a break. You know what? Follow your intuitive sense, take a moment, sit down, and offer yourself that self-compassion and that loving kindness. It's very powerful. It will be that will be my invitation to you today. Oh, there we go. Sorry. So we're almost at the close. We're almost there. I never know how well people do with this, but I'm really glad. Thank you for all continuing to be with me. So we're almost there. So emotional health and well-being and resilience is, like I said, it's less of a destination and more a journey. It's like that beautiful experiment of what's going to work for you, not how you're falling short, not where you're not making the mark, but what can you bring for yourself? Where can you find the good in what's working for the day? And I really believe it does take constant practice. It is a practice. It's the same way we talk about meditation being a practice. Exercise, I think, is a practice. Changing your diet is a practice. Working on making sure that your medications are regulated and the best that they can be for you is a practice, right? And it should be cultivated and strengthened like a muscle, this health, emotional health and well-being and resilience. And it takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. So it requires gentleness and patience. And it takes a commitment, to yourself. So I love this. It's wherever you are on this journey, probably can see me doing this. Wherever you are on this journey, know this, that you are stronger than you realize, that you are fully capable, and most important, you are worthy of feeling good about you no matter what the day brings. And that's so true. And it's my heartfelt wish for you today, that, during the day, there will be ups and downs. We all have them. Try to be gentle and frame the day, maybe with the last positive thing that happened, for example. And I love this, I love this mindful or mindful. This is another great, I'm so visual. I just love this. That is your mind full of maybe the harsh criticisms, the challenges that you have, feeling that you're less than, not hitting the mark, what needs to be done, what isn't getting done, not feeling well. Like, is your mind full, which is the human, and then his companion is like mindful, taking in the simplicity and beauty of the day, taking that moment, like we did that loving kindness exercise, to just distill it down to what might be, to loving kindness and compassion for yourself. So I just want to leave you with some ideas. And I think that these are some of the things that Giselle and I have worked with some of our the clients that we see in the various opportunities that we have to working with you is, to know yourself with compassion and patience. I think that's the message of today. That gratitude has power. It's those three good things. It's the idea of what can I be thankful for? It changes the chemistry of the brain. That gratitude, it is amazing. And remember that better beats perfect. This is Ryan Glatt. And anybody of you know Ryan Glatt, like he's just an amazing ball of energy. And he's just, he can probably run circles around most of us. But he talked about it in a group that we had about 3 weeks ago about better beats perfect. And I have to say, I saw most of my group members, their kind of shoulders drop, the idea that nothing needs to be done perfectly. In fact, hardly anything is done perfectly. The idea is that if things are better, if things are done differently, if you've made one even small step in a positive direction for yourself, that better beats perfect any day. That if you get stuck in depression or anxiety, which we are all prone to do, I would invite you to please reach out. I'm always available, Giselle, Dr. Petrosian, Dr. Diaz. We want to know and we want to be helpful and supportive. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is sometimes we talk about the just one little thing. Just one little thing that you can do in a day. Not changing your routine, not suddenly becoming a meditation master, nothing like that, but just one little thing. Maybe you will tomorrow write a list and consider yourself in that list. When am I at my best? When do I have my hardest times of the day? And give yourself that act of self-compassion. Maybe tonight, before you turn out the light, you'll think, well, what are there three things? What are the three things in my day that made me smile, that brought joy? Maybe I'll look on the internet and check out that Sylvia Boorstein that Sheila had. I'm kind of interested in maybe doing that again. Like just one little thing. It doesn't have to be big, just one, that jolt of the day, we say. So I've written some resources for you. The APDA absolutely is a great resource. They're a co-sponsor and a funding source and a strong, strong partner together in serving you and the community. The Davis Phinney Foundation is where I found the information on resilience, specifically to the Parkinson's. And so if you'd like to check it out more, please do. It's wonderful. And the Michael J. Fox Foundation. These are kind of this is not exhaustive. This is just the beginnings. And I hope that I'll have another opportunity to speak with you and spend time with you and talk a little bit more about the resources that are out there to you. And then in the idea box, I just thought that maybe, in terms of this self-compassion, this idea of resiliency, this thinking about things differently, what's out there? Well, there's the 10%.com podcast, which is really good. I'm going to forget his name, Dan. I remember his name is Dan. Dan was the newscaster who had a panic attack on air. And so he started doing meditation and it changed his life. And so now he is educating the world in terms of accessing resources for meditation and mindfulness, because it made a huge difference in his life. This is the link to Sylvia Boorstein, to her YouTube, that one, but she has many, many more. She's just a lovely presence and it's hard to not be kind when you listen to yourself when you're listening to her. There are some apps that are really good that I find helpful and clients have found helpful. Insight Timer is one, Headspace is another, Calm is another. You can try them out, experiment. Again, that idea of experimenting, that nothing is in stone. And sometimes that's unnerving, but I often think that that's opportunity, right? So thinking about all of this as a big experiment, and we're all here with you. And then, of course, I talked about YouTube because I think it's just great, And here's my information. I've appreciated your attention and attentiveness. And for those of you who are here and know me, I wish I could see you and greet you. But if you want to reach out to me, questions, if you want to let me know what your jolt is, let me help and support you. What it is you're going to be trying new, how I might be able to help and support you in that, I'm here for you. So I will end, and I don't know if there are questions or if we can talk about what's coming up next, but thank you so much. Thank you.
Sheila, that was amazing. We do have one question so far, and of course, if there are any other questions, you can type them in to the Q&A box. I just wanted to say this was brilliant. I think that, we're going to hopefully soon get this up on our website, and I feel like this would be kind of required viewing for everybody, no matter what stage they're at, and almost no matter what they're going through, even if it's not Parkinson's, anything personal or medical. This was absolutely brilliant. I loved, what you were describing, and the visuals were really helpful. There was a question about, can we get a copy? Yes, again, just as I said, we are going to have both these recordings and PowerPoint presentations, that is to say the slides, available on our website, but we're still waiting for the website to get built out fully. So, or at least that page of it to get built out. So it will be up sooner rather than later, but probably not this week. I do want to say there was a question earlier about, okay, so there's a lot of guidance here that you gave about, what people can do, but how do you marry that to somebody who's dealing with cognitive issues or who even has progressed to a stage of dementia? And I know that before you joined us, Sheila, a lot of your work was with the Alzheimer's Association. So I know you have the experience with that.
Mm-hmm. I think that, depending upon how, I'm trying to choose my words sensitively, that in terms of the memory loss, where the strengths are, let's say that, and where there might be some challenges. So I think that all these things can be used, and it might just be that the care partner or a family member might be helpful in terms of facilitating some of these ideas, making a list can be done together, for example. The cueing, reminding someone might be reminding them about that. And if you're a care partner, reminding yourself first, we talk about the oxygen mask goes on first, reminding yourself first, about the priorities of the day, for example. Or it could be a lovely exercise, at the end of the day to talk about what joy there was for both of you. I really think that once there's some memory issues, that, sometimes it does require a care partner to assist. But if there are just some fogginess or some challenges, I think that there are ways that one can make note and can, put white, some pretty board up to as a reminder. I think there's all, like that one slide, like, think about the workarounds. There's always ways to work around. If that's helpful, I hope that's helpful.
I love that idea. I think I advised that to one of my patients once. Was we have a whiteboard on our fridge, and you can't really walk past that kitchen without seeing that whiteboard, and you have your dry erase markers, and you write down 3 good things. And one thing I do tell my patients is when you do put pen to paper, neurologically, you're taking that an extra step further than just thinking of the good thing, whether it's gratitude or a joy or, what have you. Then so you have the act of thinking it, you have the act of writing it, and then you're back in the kitchen again and you have the act of reading it. Nice. So it reinforces it. And I think that could be something that's helpful, say for a care partner to do for somebody who has dementia, is to be the person who writes it down, for example, but then, read it out loud, for example, if necessary, but just as kind of that ongoing reminder of what those 3 good things were for that day or the day before, what have you. There was another question. Right. And also the pacificmovement.org is a shorter web address to write down, pacificmovement.org. I think that's, I think that kind of were the questions that were asked. Any other questions? I would also encourage whoever is asking about sort of more personalized help to email Sheila directly, and we can talk about what what other kind of ways we can get at. Also, Sheila, if you could add to your slides when they do get uploaded, there are some books about resilience. I know I read one that I found helpful. If you don't mind me jumping on your coattails to
Oh, no, please.
so it was by Sandberg, Sheryl Sandberg, and it's called Option B. And she wrote it after her husband died suddenly when they were on vacation. She's the CFO of Facebook, and she originally kind of became famous because she wrote Lean In, which is also a fantastic book. But after her husband died suddenly, tragically, she kind of co-wrote with I think a psychologist or somebody who has background with resilience research. So a lot of the work that, a lot of the stories that she told, it wasn't just her own story, it was other people's stories as well. But a lot of the stories that she told were kind of examples to tie in with the research on resilience. And it was just brilliant. And the reason why she titled the book Option B was because she was, very upset and crying with a friend of hers about her daughter needed to go to a father-daughter dance. And obviously the father had passed away, and what was she going to do? And what were the next steps? How could she handle this? What was going to happen? The father wasn't there to take the daughter. And the friend said, well, I'll take her. And, option A, the father taking the daughter, is not an option anymore. So we're just going to have to kick the out of option B. We're just going to make the best of option B. So that's kind of what had inspired the title of that book. Mm-hmm. But it's beautifully written, and I really liked it. Yes, thank you to one of our participants reminding us about the proper spelling of Michael J. Fox. It's A-E.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you for
pointing that out.
MichaelJFox.org. Also, I recommend his books. He's written 3 books, one of which is called Always Looking Up. The other one's called A Lucky Man. And the third is called, remind me, guys. Now I'm forgetting the name of his third book. Maybe Giselle, you can look it up and remind me. But again, all 3 of those books were written after he got the diagnosis of Parkinson's. And so I really think that it helps to hear it from him, because he's the one who's actually going through what, you and your families are going through. So, especially his third book, because he really had quite a setback. And he actually spoke very candidly about feeling like he was almost being dishonest with all of the, people who were looking up to him for hope and optimism. Like, how could I, go around spouting optimism and resilience and hope when I've, had this major setback and I feel so poorly? And then he, again, worked on it. Again, I think that's the other key point, is that when you're having a bad day or a bad moment, it does require ongoing work, as Sheila mentioned, in terms of, as she said, flexing that resilience muscle, building it as a muscle, if you will. Or I like to think of it more as like it's a brain connection, right? It's creating new circuitry within your brain of, rather than always defaulting to the negative, trying to build back that positive connection. And it's much harder to do, because our brain does, thank you, No Time Like the Future, An Optimist Considers Mortality by Michael J. Fox. So, he did rebuild that optimism. He was able to get back on that by using what he calls an attitude of gratitude. So I think especially that last book would be really interesting to read. I haven't read it yet. It's on my list, but I've read his first 2 books, very well written. But I think that, for example, for somebody who's an early stage, newly diagnosed, probably read one of his earlier books. Like, I think his first one was A Lucky Man, if I'm not mistaken. And so, it would be good to read that about how he, came to grips with his diagnosis. And obviously it's a very personal journey. He had, fame and lots of money and all the other pressures from being famous. So, very different from most of our patients, but still very interesting to kind of hear it from his perspective. But if somebody's going through a really, really rough time, might be interesting to read his last book about, okay, what did he do when he was feeling like, all was lost and hope was lost? How did he kind of climb that mountain back up towards, again, remembering kind of that attitude of gratitude. So I think that I'd really recommend it. And I do think I recommended to one of my patients, and they did read it and they said it was good. So I'm glad to recommend those books. Okay, well, it's 1:05 p.m. Thank you all for joining us. I really appreciate everybody who took time out of their schedule to join us today. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you so much.